Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ted Gardner, and I'm an interviewer for the Library of Congress Oral History Project here at our wonderful public library of Cincinnati. And we're going to be talking to Mr. Lou Mays this afternoon, and wonderful to get to know him. Dennis Daly, our historian here in the History Department of the Public Library, is our videographer. Lou, where were you born?
Outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a little place called McKees Rocks.
Oh, yeah.
And a mining town called Moon Run, Pennsylvania.
How about that? And what kind of a family were you born into?
Well, I'm 1/4 Scotch-Irish and 3/4 German.
Uh-huh.
And I'm the oldest of 6 children,
Wow.
born and raised on a farm.
Yeah.
My father raised tomatoes for Heinz Ketchup.
Oh, for heaven's sakes. Nice connection there.
Oh, yes. Yes.
I should say. Well, that's an interesting part of the country, and particularly Western Pennsylvania. But being in that kind of a country, part of the country, and growing up on a farm, you had some advantages that a lot of people didn't have.
Oh, yes, I did. We didn't have much, but we were independent, and we had, well, plenty of food and plenty of loving family.
Absolutely. Now, you lived outside of town on a farm?
Yes.
How about going to elementary school?
Well, I went to a small Robinson Township elementary school. There was, I think, 35 kids in my class, and then actually all the way through high school, and my graduating high school class, there were only, I think, 45.
Did you go through high school in the same
Yes,
community?
Completely through high school.
Mm-hmm.
And then right after I graduated, I was working 2 jobs I wanted to go to Pitt, University of Pittsburgh.
Oh, yeah.
But being the oldest of 6, we just couldn't afford it. So
Right.
while I was working those 2 jobs, the Korean War started, and I was able to get a deferment for a while. But then eventually all the fellows I went through school with, high school, they were drafted. So I let myself be drafted also.
Sure. Now, growing up and going through school, did you have any particular interests or hobbies or activities in high school, for example?
Yes, I belonged to the Future Farmers of America, of course.
Yeah.
And I thought that's the way that my future would go.
4-H.
Probably starting at Pitt and maybe ending up, if I was lucky, at Penn State and working maybe for the state as an agricultural agent or something like that. But very early, working on the farm, they created the Greater Pittsburgh Airport next to our farm.
Oh.
And when it was finished, they moved from Allegheny County to Greater Pittsburgh Airport, and I watched the construction, and I watched the airplanes landing.
Uh-huh.
And after following a team of horses all day and plowing and looking at airplanes, I thought, gee,
That's the way to go.
that's for me. But there was no way that I could get involved. And so on my 16th birthday, my mother took me to Butler Airport, Butler, Pennsylvania, north of Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. And I took my first flight in a Taylorcraft aircraft.
Oh, wow.
And then I was really in love with it. Sure. But still, I couldn't afford it.
Well, you're pointing out something very important, and that is that so many people forget that the effects of the really desperate years of the Great Depression were still hanging on well into the 50s.
Oh, yeah.
And you experienced that.
Mm-hmm.
And but as you pointed out, being on a farm and self-sustaining and everything, and hard-working.
Oh yes, we had 2 cows. We had fresh milk. We made our butter. My mother baked bread, and along with my grandmother, they canned for the winter and
Sure.
Put potatoes in the root cellar, and so we were really quite self-sufficient.
Yes, I should say. Well, that in many ways is quite different from what it is today.
Oh yes.
And we didn't have instant communications and the high tech that there is today. Okay, so at 16, you got your first flight. You were still in high school then, weren't you?
Yes, I actually soloed. My mother spent enough egg money that I soloed at age 16.
How about that?
But then it was just even though it was, as today's standards, it was very cheap. It was just too expensive.
Oh, yeah, I know what you
And there was no future in it unless I could go on to get a commercial license, which I hoped someday I could.
Sure. There are certain points in a person's life that are outstanding. We remember certain where we were at certain important times in history when we were growing up. Where were you when you heard about Pearl Harbor, the 7th of December, 1941?
Well, I was in, I believe, I don't know exactly where I was, but I remember my father bringing a paper home that on the front page. And I also remember bringing a paper home when Roosevelt died, and we all thought it was the end of the world.
1945, yeah, right. Did you listen to radio in those days?
Oh yes, KDKA, the first station in the U.S.
Right.
Was on, and we had a tiny little, well, first of all, we had a crystal set way back, and then we had a Crosley radio that we used to listen to the Roosevelt's fireside chats, encouraging the people.
Oh, yes. And all those wonderful soap operas and programs.
Oh, yes, and of course, I was born in '32, and times were really tough, and I can remember my dad working with the CCC and then the WPA.
Sure.
And he'd come home with, as part of his pay, with a 20-pound bag of cornmeal and a 20 or 25-pound bag of oatmeal and all kind of help from Uncle Sam.
Those were really special times, and you're speaking of the CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps, and work products.
Oh, and people were very just delighted to have the work, to have the income because of the crash and the demoralization.
Absolutely. And the way it was going, we all didn't know how we were going to work it out, how long it was going to go until we got into the war. So in 1941, then you were 19 years old. No, I mean 9 years old. You were born in 32?
32. In 1948, I soloed, and when I was 16, that was 1948.
Okay, I got you right. Well, those days were so special. You were the oldest of 6 children?
Yes.
How many sisters and brothers did you have?
Well, since I was born during the Depression, I think they waited 4 years, and then I had a brother and a sister every other year thereafter. So I have 3 brothers and 2 sisters.
Oh, isn't that wonderful?
Yes, we're still very close.
Oh, that's just great. Wonderful growing up with siblings like that. Okay, so 1950 was your class or high school
I graduated
class?
from high school, yes. And then, like I say, I went to work 2 jobs, driving a high lift, and also, as luck would have it, Capital Airlines moved to the Greater Pittsburgh Airport, and they were looking for nighttime employees. So they hired me as a sort of a hay boy, but my title was an apprentice mechanic. So little did I realize that once I got into the military, that would be quite a benefit. So that and a deferment, and so it wasn't until January of '53 that I actually was drafted along with my buddies, and that's when my world really changed.
Where were you sent for basic?
Well, we left Pittsburgh on a cattle train and went to Fort Meade, Maryland.
Oh, yes.
And I thought, gee, all my buddies would stick together, but they went to Fort Dix, New Jersey, into the MPs, and then they had orders to Germany. Well, lo and behold, I went to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and took basic training with the 11th Airborne Division, Paratroopers, as a draftee, and on my way with orders to go as an infantryman to Korea. So I thought, gee, what a what a terrible break. But as it turned out, they offered me that I could join the Paratroopers, even though they were all volunteers. But they allowed me to join as a 2-year draftee, and I went through jump school and came back to Fort Campbell and still orders to Korea. And then they found out that I had been an apprentice mechanic. So
now, what did that mean? What had you been working on as a
well,
apprentice
I was
mechanic?
Mostly a hay boy. Would drive the tugs around, towing aircraft, and work with another mechanic who would do the inspections on DC-3 airplanes that originated out of Pittsburgh. And they would allow me to sit in the cockpit with them as they taxied out and would run the aircraft up to be sure they were okay for the flight. And of course, that just, my heart would, someday I'll be able to do this.
Absolutely.
Just looking ahead. But, and of course, lucky for me, at Fort Campbell, they were looking for helicopter mechanics. So they sent me to helicopter mechanic school, and all the time I'm on orders to Korea, but this is delaying it. And I then was also was looking forward to possibly an armistice being signed. And then in July of 1953, the armistice was signed. And but then, instead of getting out right away, they offered me the opportunity to go to helicopter pilot school at Fort Sill, Oklahoma.
Now, did you go to Korea? Were you in Korea?
No, I was alerted to go
Yeah.
with the Paratroopers, and we were supposed to make, as I believe, the 4th jump. And I think 3, as I recall, the first 3 jumps were not too good.
Tell us about that first jump.
Oh boy.
Oh boy.
Well, at least I had a little experience in an airplane by soloing when I was 16. But the training was just fantastic. They really got you in shape, and you're working with a team of other fellows that you check each other's parachute, and of course you were scared to death, but you wouldn't. You had to pretend at least that you were macho, and but it was terrifying, but really exhilarating, and especially it was cool, I guess you'd say now, working with other guys as a team, a combat infantry team.
Sure, and you were meeting people, complete strangers.
Oh yes. The whole experience was that.
Guys from all over.
And it all, like I said before, I was so disappointed. But once I got in, my attitude was that I'm in here for a short period, make the best of it.
Absolutely.
And I found out ever since too that attitude.
You bet.
It really sets the stage for your
well, and with
how well you're going to do.
I know, and with your wonderful background of your family and farm experience and all that sort of thing, my goodness, you had so much going for you. Well, now let's see. So you wound up in 53. That's when you were discharged? No.
Oh no, 53 is when I got drafted.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I was drafted.
That's right. So you were drafted in 53 and served for how many years?
8 years.
8 years.
I didn't get out until January of 61.
Oh.
But during that time, I started going to night school in a bootstrap program that the Army called a bootstrap program, put on by University of Maryland, Mississippi Southern, and the University of Nebraska. So for 8 years, I went to 17 different junior colleges. And then,
my goodness.
and at the same time, I became a test pilot for Army aircraft, very new helicopters, new small aircraft, and so forth.
See.
And then at the start of the Vietnam War, I was a senior first lieutenant, and I had tested the Huey helicopter, so I was a high-time Huey helicopter pilot.
Oh my goodness.
And so now I'm on orders to to Vietnam with the first
Now, tell us-
helicopter company.
Tell us about piloting a Huey.
Well, it's very exciting. One of the reasons I got to be a test pilot was in 1955, I was involved in a crash near the Greenland ice cap. And during peacetime, I won the Distinguished Flying Cross, which is rather unusual, and that set the stage for me to go to artillery OCS, get a regular commission, and then they put me through various Air Force and Navy flight schools to become a test pilot at Fort Rucker, Alabama. And that's how I got involved in with the Huey. Picked up the first 3 at Bell Helicopter in Fort Worth, Texas, brought them back to Fort Rucker, and flew them 1,000 hours in a very short period.
My goodness. Now, did you have any college experience before you got into this helicopter?
No, when I was
Training?
drafted, I was still waiting to go to college.
Yeah.
But right after I became a paratrooper at Fort Campbell, I started going to night school. So I continually went to night school for over 8 years. No matter what, I moved around quite a bit.
Sure.
But the Army made it very easy for me to go to night school, and they
Wherever
paid for
you
it,
went,
of course.
you could
Yes.
pick it up and
of course, my
continue.
main thrust was I was saving my Korean GI Bill for some future graduate training.
Now, that's an interesting thing, yeah. You were able to do that.
Well, I was gaining experience in aviation, which I loved.
Sure.
And then in the back of my mind, I figured that I really someday wanted to go really into engineering, aeronautical engineering, or into aviation law. And very slowly over the years, I was able to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
But then I resigned my regular commission and was accepted at University of Nebraska, and went there for 3 semesters, and that's where I met my future wife, who was working on a master's in chemistry to become a dietitian.
Oh.
So at Nebraska, I also used my background to instruct student helicopter civilian helicopter pilots. And then I was accepted at various law schools, but the University of Cincinnati accepted me, and of course my future wife was coming here to intern at General Hospital.
Oh.
So that's how I wound up back in
General
Cincinnati.
Hospital.
Oh
How
yes.
about that? Well, that's a very interesting thing, and of course you were kind of working your way back toward Pennsylvania a little bit.
Yes, I never made it, but yeah.
Now, tell us about this ice cap, the Arctic experience. How in the world, what were you doing up there in the first place?
Well, I have maps and so forth and pictures that I can show you. But right out of helicopter school, I was a warrant officer junior grade.
Oh, yeah.
And my first assignment was to Thule Air Force Base, Greenland.
Oh.
And I was a bachelor, and they said mostly bachelors up there, or because it's so desolate, it's a 1-year assignment. And they, of course, told us there was a gal behind every tree.
Sure.
And of course,
No trees.
there weren't any trees. Lots of polar bears and seals and icebergs. But then they transitioned me into larger helicopters, and I went to Thule in May of 1955. And of course, they were short of pilots, and I'm a greenhorn right out of flight school. And before I got settled in, the commanding officer asked me to report to the flight line. And before I even was able to check out my winter gear and so forth, they had a flight that had to go out to the ice cap, delivering something important, 3 helicopters. And so my briefing was, look, you fly in the middle helicopter, and this will be an on-the-job training situation. The lead helicopter, there's a first lieutenant, very experienced, and an Arctic navigator. You'll be in the middle helicopter, you'll in trail, and there'll be an experienced helicopter pilot behind you. So that's fine with me. I'm going to get on-the-job training.
Terrific.
1 o'clock in the morning, sun's
There all the time.
Well, you know, you have 6 months of daylight and then 6 months of darkness. So we were flying out to the secret radar sites that the U.S. had back then, started right after World War II, on the northern tip of Greenland, which is approximately, I think, over 150 miles from the North Pole. And so we went off out in trail. A lot of discussion. I'm the new guy and had all kind of questions. And we were following trails, that barrels in the snow, a quarter of a mile apart with flags. And of course, they pointed out to me that you can't use your compass because it turns. You're close to magnetic north. And just always very easy. Even a trained monkey can do it. You can follow the trails. And every so often there are fuel caches. Well, everything went fine. We went out and stopped at various places along the way, snow trains that are following the trails, taking supplies out to the underground radar sites. And the trip for the tractors, the snow trains, would take a week and a half to 2 weeks, depending on the weather. So our helicopters were emergency support for them and to deliver the mail. Well, on the way back, everything was fine, the snow shining. We start through a long valley, and I noticed the lead helicopter starts having a condensation, a trail, like a trail that you see of a large aircraft flying through the sky.
Vapor trail.
And I said, we were conversing over the radio back and forth, and the lead pilot said, "Don't worry, it's just we're flying through some super cooled air." Because we're flying over, they pointed out, 10,000 feet of ice, prehistoric ice that's 10,000 feet thick. And so, of course, the air is uneven, and it gets super cooled. Well, I didn't think too much about it until about maybe 30 seconds later, the helicopter in front of me just disappeared, and I'm following. And the trail disappeared. And I turned around and looked, and the helicopter behind me disappeared. We had flown into, we disturbed, as I explained to me later, we disturbed the air, and it just turned into like ice crystals, fog, like an instant fog. Of course, there's probably already some fog there, but with the white background, you can't tell it, and the white sky. So we actually flew right into this, like flying into a cloud. And our helicopters they weren't equipped to fly into clouds. We didn't have, the only instrument we had were altimeter, a tachometer, fuel gauges, oil gauges, nothing to tell no artificial horizon whatsoever.
No reference to everything.
Right, so I think probably what saved me was the fact that I didn't have any experience. I didn't know really what I was doing. But I did know from my instructor in helicopter school that in helicopters, you get hurt by hitting something going forward. You can take a lot of impact straight down, and a helicopter will fly without forward speed. So I immediately killed all my airspeed as well as I could, and just was bouncing back and forth to keep from turning over, because it was like being inside a giant ping pong ball. Well, finally, I hit the snow, and I hit so hard that the skids bent, and I put the rotor out of balance. But I was smart enough. It was so cold that I didn't want to shut the helicopter down, because I'd have never got it started again. And I really didn't know where I happened to be, because I didn't have a map. My compass wouldn't work. So all at once, I'm sitting on the ice cap, and for about 15, 20 minutes, I was on the ice cap, and I still couldn't see the snow. But I know I was down because I wasn't moving. And after about a half an hour, I called Mayday, Mayday over the radio. No one answered. And we were still many miles from Thule Air Force Base. And well, as the snow started to, the overcast started to rise, I was able to look out, and 100 yards ahead of me was a wreckage, smoke coming up, and behind me, approximately 75 yards, there was wreckage and smoke, and I thought, oh my God, how in the heck did I survive? And they had, in the briefings they had told us that the reason we follow the trail, the marked trail, is this Greenland ice cap is a living thing, it's a moving thing. It's like it's alive. It's constantly moving and cracking apart, creating big crevasses. And then the snow builds snow bridges.
Right.
So they have to keep, the only safe place on the ice cap is to follow the trail that's marked, because people go in front of the tractors with long spears, testing all the time. So I was terrified to move. Well, after a while, I didn't know what to do, so I finally got my helicopter light on its skids, and I figured I'm not going to get out of the helicopter because I'm liable to fall through. At least the wide base of the helicopter would give me some protection, and it must be all right because I haven't fallen through. And so I was able to skid like a sled, using the helicopter up to the first crash, which was our navigator and the pilot. Well, the pilot was killed instantly. Oh. He had his seatbelt on, and he went through right into the instrument panel. But our navigator, a fellow by the name of Molly Mogensen, and he was a major, and he didn't have his seatbelt on for some reason. And when it crashed, he went out through the bubble and cut his throat and a compound fracture on his leg. And he looked like some sort of a wild animal that had been shot in the snow, in convulsions and bleeding.
Oh, dear.
And I can tell you, this young helicopter pilot, well, I took my belt off and I put a tourniquet on his leg and to stop the bleeding. And then I tried to pack snow around his throat. And I knew that he's going to die if we don't do something. In the meantime, the pilot in the helicopter behind me, he walked up through the snow. And I told him, I tried to tell him to stay back, I'll come for him with the helicopter. But no, he came through the snow and he made it. So we sat there. He's the experienced one now. And we took the pilot out of the cockpit, and we put him in a sleeping bag. And we decided that we had to do something. And by now, the overcast was maybe 7-8 feet tall. You could barely see underneath the overcast. And well, to make a long story short, I put him in my helicopter and I took off, not knowing which way to go. But I figured that I would fly 1 minute one way, fly 1 minute 90 degrees, until possibly I could come across the trail. And as I did come across the trail, and I was able to fly the major out to safety, and then come back and pick up the surviving pilot.
My goodness.
And I flew 3 hours in instrument conditions, low visibility, with no instruments, but just adrenaline pumping through.
Yeah. I
froze my hands and feet because I had to take the doors off the helicopter because the bubble froze up. But just one thing after another, which
I should say
really changed my life. And I made a lot of pledges on that flight.
I'll bet you
that if I survived, I would
Lord.
do this, I would do that, I would get a doctorate. So after I survived, I of course had to make all that come true.
Sure. And that was where you got the DFC award.
Yeah. It's a combat. I was really happy to get it because it's a combat award.
Right.
The highest combat award for flying, but it was given to me in peacetime, which really opened the doors then to go to school and get a regular degree, a regular commission, I mean.
Right.
And
well, it is such an important award. It's the 8th most important award in the list after the Congressional Medal of Honor, Navy Cross, and so forth. So that's just wonderful. Congratulations, and you certainly did earn it. And under those circumstances, I can see where they probably had to think about it a little bit, but realizing what you had accomplished, that was what really counted.
well, it took a while, and actually it was the the commander of the Thule Air Force Base, a colonel, who his helicopter pilots, they only flew out on the ice cap with large helicopters, and they had 2 pilots, both instrument trained, and the helicopters had instruments. So he was against the Army being there with these small Bell helicopters like you had in Korea.
Yeah.
He was against it from the start. So when he heard about what happened, I was in the hospital, I guess, for about 3 weeks, his hospital. He would come and interview, and he couldn't believe it, what happened. And he verified it all, and I believe he's the one who put me in for the Distinguished Flying Cross.
Well, that is outstanding, because through the war, there were a lot of cases where there were men who deserved more than what they got, and so forth. Now, you were in the hospital. What was your condition?
Well, I had a slight frostbite. Plus I had the 3 hours of flying, not knowing if it's going to live or die. It had a terrific impact on me. I had probably what you'd call combat fatigue. I don't know what they call it now. But I had a professor from the University of Maryland, or actually the commander of Thule Air Force Base, after he interviewed me, and I told him I really want to go to college and blah, blah, blah. And so he had an English professor from the University of Maryland, an old gentleman, come to visit me in the hospital. And he was like a psychiatrist, really. He said, I teach here, and you've got a year to go here. When you get out of here, I want you to start coming to my classes. And I said, well, I'm not sure I'm going to get out of here. And come on. He talked to me like a father. And he said, you can let this get to you, or you can make the best of it. And that's
wonderful counseling.
Yeah.
I should say. You were
and so that started me on the bootstrap program. He explained the bootstrap program, and it just seemed that that was the next step in this logical progression.
Then then you went from Maryland to Nebraska?
Well, I'd never I'd never been to Maryland. The whole time,
that was just the contact you had.
It was a contact. They put on the various classes at the Army and Navy and Air Force bases, I believe. But when I had orders to Vietnam, then I contacted Nebraska and said, I'm thinking about getting out before this gets too hot and heavy. Can I continue with the program? Well, really what they were going to do is send me to Nebraska to get my degree before I went to Vietnam. So Nebraska said, sure, come for 3 semesters, and we'll award you, if you're successful, a Bachelor of General Education. So that's what I did. So, starting from when I was drafted, what I thought was a total disaster, and almost was a progression in for me to get a very good education on the Army's book.
That was just outstanding. Now, somewhere along the line, you got interested in law?
Well, I had always been interested in law, but I just didn't have the background. No one in my family. In fact, my mother was the only one in our family way back that even graduated from high school because of the farm and so forth. So she was sort of my inspiration to get an education, no matter how long it took me to get it. Well, then it came to Cincinnati, and I started flying a traffic copter here, and went through law school. And then
did you work with Art Mehring by any chance?
I flew Art Mehring.
Did you really?
Flew Art Mehring along with Jack DeVries, who was the chief pilot, and Bill Baird, Jim Stanley, the whole crew.
Sure.
Well, in fact, the little company that I worked for through law school, once I got accepted to McGill and got my, got a JD, Juris Doctor from UC, and then I graduated from the Air and Space Law Institute. GE hired me back. Well, I was interested in the little company that I worked for, and they were just in pretty bad shape, so I was able to buy them. I had such a good position at General Electric, now I could buy the little company. And so we did traffic reports. So the whole time I was with GE, setting up their international leasing program, I was able to fly my own helicopter here in Cincinnati. Plus, during the strike, they used my helicopter to fly their executives in and out of GE plant in Evendale.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
Yep.
Boy, oh boy, what experiences you've had.
Well, the military gave me that experience, but I think too I had the right attitude to be able to get that experience.
That's right.
And through the years with GE and in the military as a test pilot, I had many people working for me, and I always found that if a fellow has the right attitude, I can teach him, or we can put him in a position and he can learn. Mm-hmm. Attitude.
You bet. Well, that is just absolutely fascinating, and all of these different people that you've had contact with. I knew Art Marion pretty well, and I knew Jim Stanley too. But anyway, that.
In fact. Some of the articles that you'll see that I have, Art Marion and Jim Stanley and Bill Baird had a write-up of my DFC in the local Cincinnati Enquirer. They were responsible for getting that done.
That is amazing.
Another thing that might be very interesting to various persons might be that I had flown the WLW helicopter while I was going through law school. And then when I started my own helicopter company, I did the WLW helicopter. And one day I got a call from Charlie Murdoch, the president of WLW. And he said, Lou, he said, would you like to take Neil Armstrong for a helicopter ride? I said, would I like to take, is a bluebird blue? Well, I got to meet Neil Armstrong. And then we were flying off of the Western Southern Garage. WLW had leased, for 10 years we flew out of there without a problem. Mm-hmm. And so Neil Armstrong came to visit us on top of the Western Southern Garage. And I asked him, why in the world would you want to fly in one of our helicopters, which is like the Korean War MASH helicopter?
Sure.
He said, well, let me tell you. He said, while I was training to become an astronaut, we had a platform, and I saw it later, a platform with various jets, and it was teetered. Mm-hmm. And he said, I was flying it one day, and it got out of control. We got up to 200 feet, and I was going to crash, and I had to jettison out of it.
Oh my God!
And I later saw film of this.
Really?
So he said, then they went to a helicopter like yours, and they put me in the right seat. And they designed the right seat just like a lunar lander. So for 300 hours, a pilot would take him off, he'd sit in the right seat, just completely encapsulated, and he would do vertical descents from 300 feet to an area, someplace in Arizona or Death Valley or someplace, that they set up to look just like the moon, with the rocks and so forth in the area that he was going to land. Right. So for 300 hours, he flew our type helicopter, just doing vertical, with the same controls and thrusts and so forth.
Really?
So he said, I would like to fly this helicopter without being totally enclosed. Yeah. So we flew for many hours. I soloed him, and we actually got him on our insurance company. On it called for 1,000 hours of helicopter time. He only had 300. But Lloyd's of London approved him to fly our helicopter, and it was a big deal for them all the way through. Neil Armstrong on this.
Sure, first man on the
and I still have the policy of putting Neil Armstrong on our.
Oh my
so that was part of the.
What a fascinating story! My goodness, and of course Neil lives out here in Indian Hill now.
Oh yeah, and I have a picture of him in our helicopter.
Very almost reclusive.
Oh yes,
very low profile.
A very he doesn't seek any publicity.
None whatsoever. He's a very modest man.
And one of the flights, I asked him, "Would you talk me through a moon landing?" And he thought about it. He said, "Sure." And so we went out into a field, and he played both parts, Houston and his own.
No kidding.
That's right.
Wow.
And he shared with me a little. I guess it's not a secret now, but he said that, as I best recall it now, it's many years ago, that we on Earth at the time only remember seeing them blasting off. Mm-hmm. But he said what most people don't realize is that we pushed the button to blast off and nothing happened.
My goodness.
And you could see,
Oh,
he said,
my-
wow, what do we do now?
Yeah.
So, I mean, they didn't panic, but you could just see that everybody down at Houston and so forth.
Sure.
Well, either he or his
Buzz.
Buzz Aldrin.
Aldrin.
Buzz
Yeah.
Aldrin came up with a pin that what had happened, the circuit breaker broke,
Oh,
and it wouldn't go all the way in. And so I guess after a few moments,
here they were.
well, after a few moments down in Houston, they're running. The engineers are going crazy. My God, this will be a disaster of all time.
Oh,
They're running through circuit breaker, and he said, "But there's nothing wrong. Nothing shows up." So I think it was Buzz Aldrin took out his ballpoint pen and he started, and it activated the system.
Sake.
Well, I guess actually the way what fired off is with his pen, he activated the circuit breaker. That maybe ought to, that's the general gist of the story. And I was fascinated to hear that story from Neil Armstrong himself. And then, of course, a few years ago, I read a story that for the first time in somebody's book, Aldrin's book or something that came out.
There was a book written just about a year ago, a little over a year ago, called First Man.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it tells about that in there. That's a biography of his that was approved by him and the family. You know. Well, Lou, that is just absolutely incredible, the experiences you've had, the people you've met.
Well,
And to be able to take care of the man himself, like that.
Yeah. Well, and also to be able to retire from General Electric and to have to work with Harry Stonecipher and Brian Rowe and Gerhard Newman, the real stalwarts of.
Did you know Fred Brown, Fred I. Brown?
Oh, sure. And of course, I got to know everyone because during the strikes, I would ferry them in and out of the plant with my helicopter. By then, I had 12 helicopters, and still working for General Electric. So they really gave me a break. But then again, they realized that the experience with my little helicopter company helped me in dealing with the international airlines, who I happened to be leasing engines to.
Oh.
So it was really great for me. I could go into an airline, go in as a mechanic, talk to the vice president of maintenance, talk to the attorneys, talk to the finance guy, and finally have a meeting with the chairman of the board if I had to.
You had the whole thing.
And so Brian Rowe, who was then in charge before Harry Stonecipher, he used me quite a bit to, whenever there was a problem, I would come along and bring a lease engine with me to quarrel if they had a problem with an engine. So
Sure.
it was very exciting.
And you had the legal training, the technical training, you had everything.
Yes.
Wow.
And by chance I had everything by being drafted in the Army in the first place. Now, how about that?
I know, but you were destined to do this.
And I almost accepted the deferment to stay back in Pennsylvania on the tomato farm.
Oh my.
And now my kids really kid me because I have a large garden and I raise tomatoes again. And I made a pledge back on the farm when I saw the aircraft going over into greater Pittsburgh. If I ever get away from 100 acres of tomatoes, I'll never look at one again. So now I enjoy growing them again.
Oh, of course. Oh my goodness, I should say. Well, now, how long were you with GE?
I was just short of 20 years.
Okay.
20 years. And by then, my little company that I started when I started with them, we had, 12 helicopters, 15 employees. So I was ready to go back to flying and managing the little company full time.
Sure.
And that was really enjoyable for me because we did, we patrolled CG&E's lines for 28 years while I was still at GE. And then we did patrolling all the way down through Kentucky into West Virginia, the power lines. See, the utilities, they used to have to walk them, and then they did it by horseback. Now they do it by helicopter and with infrared, and eventually they'll be able to do it all by computer, but they're not there yet. So it was really enjoyable for me to fly our helicopters down through West Virginia and Virginia and Kentucky, the changing seasons.
Oh my
And
goodness,
it was
yes.
really beautiful.
And the mountainous area and everything,
yes.
you had a lot of things to deal with.
Oh, yes, yes.
Altitude, environment, atmosphere.
Density, altitude, air, wind.
Sure,
Because
currents.
we would follow the lines and stay 10 feet away from them, approximately 200 feet in the air. So it was nap of the earth flying like the Army trains you to do.
Now, did you had an engineer of the company
Yes.
aboard with you
Yes,
on that?
yes, and
So
he had
could
the
see-
confidential maps that mark each tower.
Oh,
And of course, that is confidential now,
Sure.
and of course, they're worried that then after 9/11, we had to really be careful because that really is a sensitive area. Especially there's certain key locations that if they were destroyed, it would take many months to build back. So
Oh my goodness, yes. Well, now, were you still in the business when 9/11 happened?
I retired 2 years ago, yes.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So you were on the front lines of
Well,
home security and everything.
yes, we set up, where before 9/11, we had free reign to go anywhere. And then after 9/11, we set up a procedure with the local FBI and the Secret Service, and we had to coordinate with a central location before we would fly close to any power plant.
My goodness.
And before we took off, we'd have to check in, and we would get a central code on our radar so they could track us. It worked hard to track because we're flying at 150 feet.
Sure.
And most of the time you're under radar.
Yeah, absolutely.
But after 9/11, they put up surveillance radar that they could track us. So.
My goodness sakes. Now, do you have any contact with home security or the government or anything like that at all? Do they call on you for counseling and guidance? Or?
No, because I've been making myself scarce. Through the years with General Electric, I traveled around the world many, many times, and I had 36 different leasing stations, which I traveled a lot, so my wife really raised our 3 daughters. So since I've totally retired, we're traveling, and we've taken 8 cruises, and once a year I visit with the aviation attorneys that I graduated from McGill. And this last year was our 41st anniversary, and we got together in Barbados. Now the program in McGill that I talked about after law school, and the reason GE hired me really, was that they take 22 law students from around the world, different countries, and they get put together in like a UN situation, and you study aviation law and space law. So through the years we've kept together, and every year we meet in a different country. So it's coming up here shortly. I'll have to bring them all to the U.S.
Oh, how fascinating.
So that's part of what my
That's
wife and I
great.
do now.
Oh my goodness, that would be great. That's great. So you're going to be doing that this year or next year?
We did it this year. We went to Barbados.
That was
The year
Barbados
before
this
we
year.
were in Montreal, and then next year in June we're going to Berlin because our representative from Berlin, he's in the ministry there, and he's the head of tourism, international attorney for tourism for Germany.
nice
So
connection.
he makes and we're going to visit all the government agencies and so forth. So
Oh my goodness.
it's really
So
really
when do
great.
you expect to get them back come to the U.S.?
Maybe the year after, if we have they're all interested in our tall stacks. So I'd like to maybe get them back for tall
That'd be
stacks
great.
if they have
That'd be
it.
great.
Or
Oh, that would
they're
be
talking
wonderful.
about maybe not having it, but
That'd be wonderful. Maybe we can get you out to our Tri-State Warbird Museum out at Claremont County Airport. That would be a wonderful thing too, because that's a great place.
Oh, yes, well-
you know about that?
oh yes, yes. In fact, right after I left McGill and went to work for General Electric, I made a deal with the dean of the Air and Space Law Institute in Montreal, And my wife and I would bring 5 students, 4 to 5 students, for a week during the summer. And we would take them to the Air Force Museum in Dayton,
Yes.
and the Neil Armstrong Museum up
Sure,
in
Wapakoneta.
Wapakoneta, down to the horse country. But their highlight was, after I had flown with Neil Armstrong, these are student lawyers or graduate lawyers studying space law, and would get to sit down with Neil Armstrong at University of Cincinnati.
Oh, brother.
It started an hour, but it'd usually be 2 or 3 hours.
Oh, sure.
Because getting the input, it was exciting for him, getting the input from these attorneys from different countries.
I'm sure it was.
Yeah.
And of course, he's so bright and so
Oh yeah, he was
highly
he was a
educated.
professor of aeronautical engineering
Oh, yeah.
at the time.
Have you ever met Buzz Aldrin?
No,
Never met
No.
him. Any of the other astronauts?
no, just
Well, you got
Yeah.
the most famous of all. That's just outstanding, Lou.
yeah.
Well, my goodness, now you say you have 3 daughters, grown daughters. You have
Yes.
grandchildren?
Oh yes, 7 grandchildren,
Wonderful.
and they all live in Cincinnati.
Isn't that wonderful?
And the grandkids come and give us all their love, and then they go home.
Yeah. You got the best of the whole world right there. Well, now, do you have anything in the future? Do you have plans for anything else in the way of enterprise or?
Well, God willing and the creek don't rise, I've been invited by the the present dean of the Air and Space Law Institute to possibly come back and do some classes on international leasing. And he'd like to see me start up the program of bringing students back to Cincinnati for a week. They would pay for it, but my wife and I are thinking about that, but it's
Where
quite
is
an
that
effort.
based? Where is that operation based? That man you're talking with?
In Montreal.
In Montreal?
Yeah, at the Air and Space Law Institute, McGill. At McGill.
There's that.
Yeah,
That's at McGill?
Yeah, at
Oh, I
McGill
see.
in Montreal.
I got you.
Yeah,
I see.
and so,
I see. Well, just think of the influence that you have. It just amazes me, and it's just outstanding. Had no idea, of course.
Well,
And-
what really, you talk about influence, the fact that I was able to go to McGill, which is the Harvard of Canada,
Yeah.
after UC, it really opened the doors again for me. And of course, when I dealt with the GE's international attorneys in New York, of course, they're all Harvard and Stanford and the top law school.
Ivy League.
And so it was a real effort for a UC law student to break into that area and to work with them. But the background being in mechanics and a test pilot and so forth,
Everything that
I was able to get really in with McGill now, with the input of the attorneys there. I was able to go into these countries and contact a McGill alumni. That would help me in setting up.
course.
Because back then, in 67, 68, 70, when we had to put these engines in the various countries, no one leased anything out of the United States because we had a uniform commercial code and we felt protected. But you wouldn't dare put a GE-owned piece of equipment just out at some foreign location.
I see.
The risk was just too high. And it's only till recently, 2 years ago, that an international treaty was put into effect that now it's safe to do that, and it's called the Cape Town Treaty. So the whole time I was with GE and doing that, we were really taking a big risk, but GE was willing to risk leasing their equipment to do this, to better, to capture the international aviation market.
Well, this, I am so impressed, and this is just, it's just amazing of your contacts and your influence that you had. You have a degree now from McGill.
I have a Bachelor of General Education from Nebraska,
Yeah.
a Juris Doctorate from University of Cincinnati, and then I've just graduated from a one-year program at
How
McGill.
about that? How about that?
Yeah.
Boy, you've been a lifelong scholar.
Well,
Study, study, study.
I think I've had the right attitude, and that made it easy.
You certainly have. Well,
And being raised and born and raised in this great country of ours,
yes,
you can do anything if you really want to,
absolutely.
and especially if Uncle Sam helps you along
That's
with the
right.
cattle prod.
And of course, we're still the greatest nation in the world, despite
Our
cracks
challenges.
and crevices and so forth. One thing I wanted to ask you about Greenland. Were you ever aware of the Glacier Girl, the plane that went down
Sure,
in the
sure.
ice cap?
Sure, but because
You
they
knew
had
about
started that. They had started that, but and it was buried. And then also, there were some other aircraft too. A whole fleet, 2 or 3 smaller aircraft that went down. I guess through the years there have been quite a few
Yes.
that landed on the ice cap, and then through the years it was covered.
Sure.
Well, for example, they tell me that the Air Force, the radar sites that we were supplying up near the North Pole, in 1944 or 45, when they built them, they were on top of the ice cap.
Right.
When I was there in 55, they were something like 20 or 30 feet under the ice.
My
So now, I don't,
Oh.
they must be really,
Completely, yeah.
maybe it's going the other way now, though, with the melting of the ice cap.
How about that?
But what an experience to fly and walk over 10,000 feet of ice.
Just
Let me
imagine.
tell you.
Sure. Millions of years of ice.
That's right, prehistoric ice.
Oh, my goodness sakes. Well, I wish we could talk another hour, Lou. You've got so many things that you could impart and tell us about your wonderful escapes and experiences and so forth and so on. And I hope that, well, I know when your family gets this DVD and hears you and hears your story and everything, they're going to be so happy and so proud of it. And that's the wonderful thing about this program, is that now you're on record forever, whether you like it or not.
Well, my daughter put most of the stuff together, and she got me interested in coming down here, or I probably wouldn't have done it.
Well, we're just honored that you've done that, and we thank you so very much. And anything else come to mind quickly? We got about a minute left. If you want to tell us anything that.
Well, I want to thank you for your time and giving me this opportunity,
Well, it's
and for the people here in Cincinnati that's making this come true. Because
Well,
I know there are a lot of other fellows out there that their story needs to be told. That,
well, that's right.
that were really true heroes in World War II and in Korea and
Well,
Vietnam. They're going to do it probably for Vietnam eventually too.
Oh yes, we'll get to it eventually if we live long enough. But there are, and it's funny, despite the mortality rate, when the word gets around, word of mouth and so forth, more and more people are coming out of the
Well,
woodwork.
I'll certainly spread the word, because
Spread the word.
I didn't know what to expect
Yeah.
when I came down.
With
but
your contacts and everything, my goodness, that would be invaluable, Lou, and we
Yeah.
hope you will do that. And you'll know how to get in touch with
Sure.
with Dennis here and everything. But it is so important. We've lost so many people who never told their stories, never got the chance.
Yeah.
But we're doing our best to keep up. And this library is a Veterans Memorial. I don't know if you knew that or not.
No, I didn't know
But
that.
when this building was built, in what, 54? 54. It was dedicated to the veterans who served in all the wars from Hamilton County.
Oh my.
And on Veterans Day, the 11th of November, and it's coming up pretty soon, we've got a great ceremony here, and I hope you'll be able to come into town and be there for that, because one thing, I've had a part in it for the last 10 years, we'd like to have you recognized. And I think that would be very important. I think we can work that out, because you are exceptional. I don't know of anybody else anywhere that's had the experience that you have and have been able to tell it so well. You speak well, and you've been able to explain things
So,
to
thank you.
us very much, and we thank you for it.
Oh,
Thanks
thank you for
again.
your time.
Well,
for your
thank
time.
you. Keep them flying, and
Okay.
boy, oh boy, what a deal.